When family love turns into entitlement and care becomes control, that's when you realize blood can drain more than it gives. My name is Avery Daniels, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I've worked for everything I have: my career in marketing, my apartment near downtown, and the peace that comes from paying my own bills. But lately, that peace has felt like a luxury I'm not allowed to keep. My parents began calling more often, asking about my salary, my savings, my future plans. At first, I thought it was concern. Then Mom mentioned that I should buy a big house, one with a garden and several rooms, so your father and I can move in. We're not getting younger. Dad didn't hesitate to agree. He said it would be family-minded, that we could save money by living together, and that I could handle the expenses since I was doing so well. When I asked what would happen to their current home, Mom smiled and said, "Your brother will take it. He'll need space once he gets married." In that moment, everything clicked. They weren't asking me to build a family home. They were trying to trade my independence for their comfort and reward my brother with what they already had. I stayed quiet then, but I knew I wouldn't stay quiet for long, because I was about to teach them something they'd never forget. If you've ever been forced to choose between independence and obligation, stay until the end. You might find your own voice in my story. 2 weeks before Dad's birthday, everything started to shift. It began subtly with texts from Mom containing links to houses far larger than I could ever need. She always added cheerful notes, calling them wonderful neighborhoods and perfect places for family gatherings. One evening, she sent another link and said, "Sweetheart, this could be such a meaningful gift for your father." Her tone was loving, yet there was a rehearsed softness that unsettled me. A few minutes later, my father joined the call. He spoke warmly about family and legacy, telling me he didn't want presents or parties this year. "I don't need anything for my birthday, except a home for all of us," he said. The words were wrapped in affection, but landed like a weight on my chest. I smiled and said I would think about it, even though I had no intention of buying a house anytime soon. That weekend, I visited them in person. The moment I walked in, Mom was already showing me pictures of houses with spacious living rooms and multiple guest rooms. "Look at this one, Avery," she said, tapping the screen with enthusiasm. "It's big enough for everyone, and you could host holidays here. Doesn't it feel right?" My father nodded approvingly. "We'd help, of course," he said. "I could fix things around the house, mow the lawn, keep it in order." I could hear the excitement in his voice, the certainty that I would say yes. I forced a smile, hoping my hesitation didn't show. They spoke about family unity and the importance of being close, but I could already sense that every word was pushing me toward a decision they had already made. During dinner that evening, Mom brought up the topic again. "You know your father's birthday is coming soon," she said. "Wouldn't it be wonderful to surprise him with something lasting?" I nodded politely while cutting my food into tiny pieces, pretending to consider it. Then Dad added, "It's not about gifts, Avery. It's about having everyone together. A house means a home. That's all I want." I went home feeling uneasy, trying to convince myself that they were simply being sentimental. But the next morning, another message came with a new link. "This one just got listed," Mom wrote. "It's beautiful." Not long after, Dad called to say we should move fast before someone else takes it. The word "we" lingered in my mind longer than it should have. A few days later, I joined a family dinner over video call because I was too busy to drive back. That's when my older brother Daniel appeared on screen from Tucson with his fiancée Emma. He grinned at me through the camera and said, "Come on, Avery. You're the one doing great now. Don't let Mom and Dad stay stuck in that old place." Emma laughed beside him and added, "It would be so nice to see them somewhere fresh." Their voices blended into the same melody of pressure disguised as affection. Dad started explaining how convenient it would be for everyone if I bought a larger house. "It'll save us all time and money," he said, "and we'll finally have space for Daniel and Emma to visit." Mom agreed, immediately adding, "You'll have help, darling. You won't have to handle things alone anymore." I could only nod while my thoughts spiraled into calculations, mortgages, maintenance taxes. Every scenario ended with me paying for everything. That night, I lay in bed staring at my phone as new messages appeared one after another. Mom asked if I had thought about the listings. Dad reminded me that family always comes first. Their words circled in my head until they lost meaning, just sounds that pressed closer with every passing hour. Their words sounded like love, but felt like an order I could never refuse. A week later, I stopped by my parents' house with a cake and good intentions. It was a warm afternoon, the kind that usually carried the scent of something cooking and the sound of Mom humming in the kitchen. I wanted the visit to be easy, maybe even comforting. After all, it was almost Dad's birthday, and I thought bringing a cake might open the door to a calm conversation about what kind of celebration they wanted. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. I called out softly, "Mom, Dad, I brought something sweet," but no one answered. From the hallway, I could hear faint voices coming from the living room. The television wasn't on, it was the tone of conversation private and focused. I hesitated, meaning to announce myself, but then I recognized the voices. It was Dad and Daniel speaking through a video call. Dad's voice carried clearly across the room. "Once Avery signs the contract, we'll move in right away," he said. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Then Mom's voice came quieter but firm. "What about this house?" she asked. Dad didn't even pause. "Give it to Daniel," he said with certainty. "He's starting a family, he needs it more." The air seemed to thicken. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cake box trembling slightly in my hands. Through the reflection on the glass cabinet, I could see Dad leaning toward the screen, smiling as Daniel nodded in agreement. My brother's voice was casual, almost cheerful. "That would be perfect, Dad. Emma's already talking about fixing the backyard." The words struck me one by one, each heavier than the last. They weren't talking about a dream or a distant plan. They had decided everything already: my role, their reward, Daniel's gain. The birthday gift wasn't a gift at all. It was a transaction, one where I paid and they benefited. Mom reappeared in the frame of the doorway carrying a laundry basket. "Avery," she said, startled. Her eyes darted from the cake in my hands to my face, then to the living room where Dad was still speaking. I couldn't tell if she realized how much I had heard. "Oh, you're here early," she added, forcing a smile. I nodded faintly and said nothing. My father's voice still carried behind her. "We'll tell her it's for family unity. She'll agree if we say it's what's best for everyone." Mom winced and turned toward the sound, whispering, "John, she's here." The screen went silent. I could feel the silence pressing against the walls, filling the air that just moments ago had been filled with plans that excluded me entirely. Dad stepped into the hallway, his expression stiff, but quickly rearranged into something softer. "Avery, sweetheart," he said, his tone too casual. "You should have told us you were coming." His eyes flicked briefly to the cake box before returning to mine. I wanted to ask him if everything I had just heard was true, but the words refused to come out. "I just thought I'd drop this off," I managed, finally. My voice sounded foreign to me, flat, almost mechanical. He thanked me, reaching out to take the cake, but I held it tighter, unable to let go. The absurdity of the moment burned inside me. I had walked in with sweetness, only to discover the bitterness underneath it all. "I should go," I said quietly, stepping back toward the door. Mom followed, trying to keep her tone light. "At least stay for coffee," she offered. I shook my head. "Another time." My father didn't try to stop me. Outside, the afternoon light felt harsher. The cake box grew heavier with every step I took until I finally placed it on the passenger seat of my car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. The house behind me stood calm and still, as if nothing had happened, but I could still hear their voices echoing in my head: Dad's calm certainty, Daniel's easy laughter, Mom's hesitant silence. As I drove away, I remembered what my former coworker Diane once told me after I had stayed late to cover someone else's mistakes: love can't be built on guilt. Back then, I thought she was talking about work boundaries. Now I realized she was teaching me something far deeper, that guilt had been the currency of my family for years, and I had been the one funding it. The next morning, I woke up knowing things couldn't go back. The sunlight leaking through the curtains felt foreign, too bright, too ordinary for what I now knew. Every memory of my parents, every dinner, every phone call, suddenly seemed like a carefully rehearsed act, with a purpose that no longer felt like love. I stared at my phone for a long time before finally turning it face down. There would be no more calls, no messages, no explanations. I didn't block them, but I stopped answering. Mom sent the first text before noon. "We're worried about you. Come by for dinner." Then another followed, more insistent. "Don't be upset. You misunderstood what we meant." Dad called 3 times that day. I watched his name flash across the screen, the familiar image of his smile beside it, and felt nothing but a tired ache. For the first time in my life, I chose silence. By evening, I couldn't bear the sound of my own thoughts. I called my best friend Renee, who had known me since college. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, a quiet place where the smell of roasted coffee always seemed to calm me. She arrived in her usual rush of warmth, wrapping me in a hug before sitting across from me. I told her everything: the cake, the conversation, the plan that wasn't meant for me to hear. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned forward and said softly, "You have every right to be angry, Avery. But don't let that anger decide what you do next. If you fight with fury, you'll only give them more control." Her words landed gently but cut deep. "So what do I do instead?" I asked. Renee smiled, not with pity but with certainty. "You draw the line," she said. "You teach them where you end and they begin." That night, I couldn't sleep. Her voice replayed in my mind again and again. Draw the line. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the space I had spent years giving away. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Lewis, and scheduled a meeting. When I arrived at his office, the air smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. He was a quiet man in his 50s, always polite, always direct. I had worked with him once before on a contract dispute at my job, and I trusted him to be both discreet and thorough. He greeted me with a small nod. "Avery, it's been a while. What can I help you with today? I need advice." I said, "If I buy a house under my name, is there any legal way for my parents or anyone to claim ownership later?" Mr. Lewis raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He opened a folder, took a few notes, and began explaining calmly about property law, inheritance claims, and co-signing risks. He clarified that as long as I purchased the house independently with no shared financial responsibility, no one could demand a share of it, family or not. I listened carefully, not just to the words, but to the sense of empowerment they carried. It wasn't just about a house. It was about boundaries that had never existed before. When he finished, I thanked him and said, "I'm not buying yet. I just needed to know what's mine." He smiled faintly. "That's the best reason to ask." Walking out of his office, I felt something shift inside me, not the sharp relief of revenge, but a calm steadiness I hadn't felt in years. My parents had taught me generosity, but never how to protect myself from being drained by it. For once, I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted to stop giving them the power to hurt me. That evening, I wrote a short message to Mom and Dad. "I need some time to think. Please don't contact me." I didn't explain or justify it. I just pressed send and placed the phone down, feeling an unfamiliar quietness settle around me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. Dad's birthday dinner arrived sooner than I expected. The house was bright with laughter, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and Mom's cinnamon pie. I hadn't been there since the day I overheard their plan, yet nothing about the place had changed except me. I stood at the door for a long moment before knocking. When Mom opened it, her smile stretched wide, almost theatrical. You made it, sweetheart? We were just talking about you. Inside the dining table was beautifully set candles flickering between plates of food. Dad beamed when he saw me. There's my girl, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a performance than affection. I smiled politely, pretending not to notice the exchanged glances between him and Mom. Then Daniel appeared with his fiancée Emma right behind him. They looked radiant, casual, perfectly at ease. Daniel grinned and said, "So the big buyer is finally here." His tone was teasing, but there was a glint of certainty underneath. Emma added, "We were just talking about how wonderful it'll be to have a new house for everyone. It's going to be beautiful, Avery." Her voice was gentle, but her words landed heavily. I took my seat at the table right across from them. Mom poured me wine and said sweetly, "You're too quiet, darling. We were all just saying how thoughtful you are." Even Mrs. Lang from next door said, "What a blessing to have such a devoted daughter." She turned to her friend sitting nearby, smiling proudly. "Avery has always been so giving, always thinking of her family first." The neighbor nodded with admiration. "You're lucky parents," she said. "Most children these days are too busy for family." I lifted the glass to my lips and smiled faintly. Every compliment felt like a thread tightening around my throat. Across the table, Daniel and Dad were already talking about how they would handle the move. Dad said it'll be a fresh start for all of us. The neighborhood where Avery's buying is perfect. Close to the park, quiet, safe. Daniel chuckled. And the old house won't go to waste. Emma already has plans for the nursery. The room filled with light conversation and clinking forks, but I could feel the slow, steady pulse of my heartbeat in my ears. It was almost surreal how easily they could build a fantasy around my silence, how comfortable they were with assuming ownership of something I hadn't promised. Halfway through dinner, Dad raised his glass. "To family," he said. Everyone followed glasses, lifting smiles all around. I mirrored the gesture, my hand steady, my heart detached. The toast echoed through the room like a lie repeated too often to sound strange. As the plates were cleared, Mom stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. "You've made your father so proud," she whispered. "He says this is the happiest birthday he's had in years." I looked up at her and smiled, though the expression felt foreign. "I'm glad," I said simply. When dessert was served, the lights dimmed slightly and laughter swelled once more. Dad cut the first slice of pie and everyone clapped when he blew out the candles. Then, before anyone could speak, I rose from my seat. The sound of my chair scraping the floor drew every eye to me. "I also have a gift," I said calmly. The room went quiet. My parents smiled expectantly. Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Of course you do," he said lightly. "Always the generous one." I met his gaze without blinking. "It's a gift for all of you," I continued. My voice was soft but deliberate, filling the silence that hung between us. "And I think you'll find it memorable." No one spoke. The candles flickered, their light trembling against the glassware. I sat back down, letting the tension settle where it belonged. For the first time that evening, I wasn't the one performing. When I handed Dad the folder, the room fell silent. The laughter that had filled the air moments before seemed to dissolve into something heavy and expectant. Everyone's eyes turned to the thin brown envelope in his hands, as if it were a gift that would confirm every dream they had built on my silence. Dad looked up at me, his smile brimming with pride. "So this is it," he said, glancing toward Mom. "Our girl finally did it." Mom's hand brushed her necklace nervously, though her face remained lit with delight. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table, while Emma squeezed his arm as if to say, "See, everything's falling into place." The air felt thick with anticipation. Dad opened the folder, carefully pulling out the neatly stacked documents inside. I watched his expression shift from warmth to confusion as he skimmed the first page. His brows furrowed slightly. "Wait, what is this?" he murmured. Mom leaned closer, her voice light and trembling with excitement. "Isn't that the deed? Honey, The house in Willow Creek? I took a slow breath. It's a deed. Yes, I said, but not to that house. Daniel reached over, grabbing one of the pages. His eyes darted across the text before he froze. Avery? He said, his voice dropping. This address? This isn't even in the same state. That's right, I answered, my tone calm, almost gentle. It's a house I bought last week. In Vermont. In my name only. Dad looked up sharply. In your name only. His voice cracked, and for a second he didn't seem to recognize me. You mean your mother and I are not on it? I said. No co-signers, no shared title, no hidden conditions. I looked directly at him, then at Mom, who had gone pale. I thought long and hard about what I owe this family. I owe you love. I don't owe you a mortgage. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words hung there, simple yet irreversible. Then Mom covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Avery, she whispered, we never wanted to hurt you. We just thought that I would take care of everything. I said quietly, that my worth depended on how much I could give, not who I am. Dad slammed the folder shut, his voice rising with anger. You're misunderstanding everything we've done for you. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. Is this how you repay us, by walking away? I steadied my breathing, forcing myself to meet his eyes. I'm not walking away, Dad. I'm stepping out of a role I never agreed to play. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. So that's it. You get a fancy house for yourself, and we're left behind. His face flushed with disbelief. You're unbelievable, Avery. Emma reached for his hand, whispering his name, but he pulled away. The sound of his voice, sharp and wounded, cut through the room like broken glass. Mom sobbed harder, clutching Dad's arm. She doesn't mean it. She pleaded. She's just angry. She'll come around. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I felt strangely calm, as if the storm had already passed. I placed the folder back on the table and said softly, this isn't punishment. It's peace. I hope someday you'll understand that. I turned and walked toward the door. My heels clicked softly against the wooden floor, the sound echoing in the silence behind me. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool and still. Through the window, I saw the flicker of candlelight, the silhouettes of the people I loved frozen in disbelief. For the first time, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I had not destroyed anything. I had simply chosen myself. It's been 6 months since that dinner. The snow outside my window glows pale beneath the morning sun, blanketing everything in silence. Life in Vermont has a slower rhythm, one that doesn't demand constant explanation or apology. I wake to the smell of coffee, the hum of the heater, and the quiet sound of my own breathing, a peace I didn't realize I had been craving for years. The house I bought feels lived in now. There are sketches pinned to the wall, a half-read book beside my bed, and a row of plants leaning toward the light. Each small imperfection feels like proof of a life that finally belongs to me. I sometimes think of Phoenix, the heat shimmering off the pavement, the endless errands and obligations that once filled my days. I don't miss it. My parents, Mom and Dad, still live in Arizona, though not in the old house. After that night, they couldn't afford to keep it. They moved in with relatives for a while, and from what I've heard through distant conversations, it hasn't been easy. Pride doesn't pay bills, and neither does silence. Daniel stayed behind to take care of the property, but the repairs turned out to be more than he could handle. The roof leaks, the plumbing is unreliable, and the mortgage is still under his name. He called me once months ago asking for advice. Not help, just advice. But the tone in his voice carried a quiet exhaustion that told me everything I needed to know. I wished him well and meant it. Whatever anger I once had toward him dissolved somewhere between the falling snow and my own reflection in the mirror. Mom sends messages every few weeks. They're short, cautious, written like someone stepping across thin ice. We hope you're doing well, she writes. Your father is still upset, but he misses you. I read them all, sometimes more than once, before quietly putting my phone down. I haven't replied yet, though not out of spite. It's because I no longer feel the need to explain my piece to those who mistook it for rebellion. In these quiet mornings, I've learned that fairness begins with saying no. It isn't cruelty, it's clarity. For so long, I believed love meant sacrifice, that giving without limit would somehow prove my worth. But love that depends on guilt isn't love. It's debt disguised as devotion. There's a park near my new home lined with birch trees that whisper when the wind passes through. I walk there most evenings, watching the children chase each other while their parents call out from the benches. Sometimes I imagine what my parents would think if they saw me now, walking slowly, unburdened, smiling for no reason. Maybe they'd still call it selfish. Or maybe in time they'd understand that choosing peace is the most generous thing I've ever done. One Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and realized how far I had come from the version of myself who once begged for approval. That woman believed family was something you had to earn. This one knows it should never have been conditional. The sun dipped low, turning the snow into sheets of gold. I thought of Dad's voice, firm and certain, saying I'd regret walking away. Yet 6 months later, regret is nowhere to be found. In its place is a quiet kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't shout or prove itself but simply exists, steady and unwavering. I have no grand plans, no dramatic resolutions. I still work, still cook, still water my plants on Sundays. Life didn't become extraordinary. It became honest. And that honesty feels like the first real home I've ever had. When people ask if I do anything differently, I smile and say no, because sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is also the kindest. Sometimes peace costs more than approval. It asks for distant silence and the courage to stand alone when love becomes conditional. I've learned that family doesn't always mean harmony, and kindness doesn't always mean surrender. It takes courage to love your family without losing yourself, to choose boundaries instead of bitterness and truth instead of performance. Real love breathes when you stop proving your worth to the people who should have seen it all along. Freedom, I've realized, isn't the absence of others, it's the return to yourself after you've given too much away. If my story has reached you, thank you for listening until the end. Maybe you've faced a similar crossroad between guilt and peace, between expectation and truth. I hope this story reminds you that you are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are brave for doing so. Tell me your story in the comments. What does home mean to you? Now I'd love to hear it, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that heal us most.